Pre-mating usually starts in mid to late February, but as of yet, it was about the second week in March now, and I hadn't noticed or filmed any type of activity that I would consider possibly mating activity. And finally, one afternoon, I noticed that the gobbler was working close to a hen that was standing and seemed to be noticing his movements. He just seemed to march back and forth around her. And she was just watching him. He was very patient. And at times, she would just jump up and run from him. But she would return again. I didn't have the best camera angle, as you can see, but I continued filming because I finally realized this is what they call the mating dance. I didn't want to take a chance in moving my camera and possibly scare them and stop the whole procedure. So I just continually filmed at my best advantage. This type of footage is not the easiest in the world to obtain. Let's just take time now and watch what happens. They were just continuing to go around and round this little low tree. He seemed more than determined, and everything continued the same until I saw him finally gobble and things changed. I finally left my blind and was able to slip around and move my camera angle. And as they got into more dense areas in that small, low bush, I tried to zoom in and shoot as best I could on what was going on. As you can see now, he has mounted the hen. Her head is just right under his head. And his feet is kneading into her back as they are copulating at this moment. After copulation, you see she gets up, shakes her feathers and body off, probably trying to get circulation back into her limbs, as a heavy bird would be sitting on the back of a small hen. You can see how this weight might cause that kind of situation. And finally, she just runs off, and they continue to feed again as normal. In order to save time, of course, I had to edit this whole ritual. But from the time they started noticing one another until copulation was over, this lasted about 30 minutes. Hens that are not mated seem to stay together in a group and feed together, as hens that do mate seem to stay together. One or two at a time, they'll leave their nest and wander out together for a few moments before going back to the nest. Our old gobbler just seems to continually feed and keep himself ready for mating. You can see just by looking why he's known as the king of game birds. His most royal majesty, with all its colors that nature has given him, is a beautiful sight to behold. I was very fortunate to get this unusual close-up of the head of this particular wild turkey. Notice the snoot just above his bill keeps rising and lowering. As he gets excited for mating, the snood will fill up with blood, and as it fills with blood, he'll finally shake his head, and the blood seems to make the snood get longer, and this seems to attract hens more. He uses his color, and it seems the snood too is used as an attractant to the hen. I consider myself more than fortunate to be able to get this type of footage in the wilds of South Carolina. What a magnificent bird. What color. Such a show he is able to put on is unbelievable at times. Nature is truly remarkable. This type of activity will continue throughout the month of March and the month of April. It's a perfect time in March to go out now and look for signs of the wild turkey, because where you will find them now in the end of March is where you're most likely to find where they'll be feeding the month of April. This one bird has found some hedgelings and feeding on them. Beech nut trees are a wonderful area to look for the wild turkey in the end of March. Let's join our special guest, Lovett Williams, with more information on the wild turkey. Lovett, I get this question a lot of times, and I know you've heard it before again, but please answer it again. Windy days. Our weather is not always perfect when we're in the woods during the season. What could we expect to possibly run up on a turkey on a windy day, or how should we react as far as the wind in the woods?
Well, turkeys are somewhere, you know, regardless of the weather, regardless of the wind, so they're out there. I think that they're probably in the same places they are when it's not windy. The real problem is hearing a turkey and finding them when it's windy. And in turkey hunting, I like to move downwind on a windy day, calling, and that way my calling carries farther downwind until the turkeys can hear it. And then I have to be especially attentive to hear an answer, because their answer is coming against the wind. So it's not a good situation to be hunting in, but that's the way I deal with windy weather. Also, I think you have some advantages if you use your eyes real well in windy weather, because vegetation is shimmering and moving, and this keeps the turkeys from spotting your movement as quickly as they would. So I think that in recollecting a lot of the hunts I've been on and messing with turkeys, whether I was hunting or not, I believe I've spotted more turkeys before they spotted me on real windy days.
Looks like a turkey collar there in your pocket.
Yeah, I always take that around with me, and usually thinking around my neck.
Is that the wing bone? Or?
Yeah, this is radius and the ulna, the two bones. You have them too, you know, in your arm. Eating chicken, you know, especially in chicken wings. The small bone there that lies beside the large bone, that's the radius, and this is the ulna. I cut off the ends, and there's a lot to making one of them. You got to boil them and get all the meat off and clean them out and all that.
I understand there's a lot to blowing one of them, too.
There is, yeah. There's more to blowing one of them. It's needed. Actually, you suck on it. You make the noise by sucking on it. And you kind of make a smacking sound. It's real difficult to learn how to use one. Once you get the hang of it, it's just a lot of fun. It's like playing an instrument or something, and it has a lot of mystique. It's the oldest kind of turkey call, probably, according to some historians. The Indians used this one small wing bone and had ways of doing their hands so they make it sound like turkey. Also, see, you can identify, this is a turkey. It's part of the turkey. It's the wild turkey. And I like to add one thing. The smarter the turkey that you make these bones from, the better it calls. But most people use the hen radius is smaller and use the gobbler ulnar. But it can be done the other way around, and using the gobbler ulnar is all right. This is one of my favorites. It just happens to fit my hands right. No, I make quite a few of them every year.
Would you make a few of the basic calls and maybe explain them?
Well,
if you think...
Sure, I'd be glad to. I don't go in for a whole lot of elaborate calling. I've recorded all the elaborate calls that turkeys make, and I enjoy messing with them. Never have felt the real need to learn to imitate them. I don't enter contests and all. So I have a real simplified way of going about turkey calling. The most important call in spring calling is the plain yelp of the hen, and it's like this. 4, 5, 6 notes on a steady beat. Also, in the fall, I hunt in the fall some. I'm from Florida, live in Florida, and we have a fall season there, and some other states do too. Probably the most important call in the fall is the lost call, the lost yelp.
Right.
And about the only difference between it and the plain yelp is it's louder, a lot louder. And usually a lot longer. Has more notes to it. The turkey's trying to be heard farther away. The plain yelp, the turkey usually the turkeys that are communicating with the plain yelp are usually in sight of one another, and they don't yelp very loud. The lost call, the turkey's searching acoustically for the turkeys. You can make other sounds, cluck. You can also do cutting or fast clucking. Which is something turkeys do when they're searching for another turkey, but not necessarily lost. There are a lot of other calls that you can learn, and it would be fun. I can do some other things when I'm really practiced that way. You can key on these things. And key run is, of course, probably the most important fall call in fall hunting when you're dealing with young turkeys. And people that really get into it can probably make some calls that I can't make. I just never have become a complete fanatic. But I do think that calling is the thing that makes turkey hunting so fascinating to people, because by calling turkeys, you interact with your game, and you then try to deceive it into coming to you in gun range. You depend less on luck than you do when you're just trying to kick a rabbit out of the brush or hope a squirrel, you know, is in the next tree that you get to, and that sort of thing. So turkey hunting is a more deliberate, interactive kind of sport, and I think that's what makes turkey hunting so popular, is the calling part of it. And I also think that a person can be be very unskilled in many other aspects of hunting, but can master calling with any of the instruments that are used, and be a successful turkey hunter and enjoy it a whole lot. And the better he can learn to call and use calling, you know, the better he gets in his turkey hunting success. And any kind of sport where you can measure your close correlation between your learning and your experience and your skill with success, well, that makes it really good, you know, because a lot of things we do, you don't get any better at. You know?
April in South Carolina. Yes, just like the books say, the rains do come, and it seems to enhance more than 350 plant species and literally hundreds of insects. The old gobbler during this period seems more than anxious, looking for hens that are not nesting. a hen that he can just mate with once more. By this time, hundreds of hunters are entering the woods, hoping for their chance with a wild turkey. It seems they are more wearier than ever now. All senses are working full time. That hearing, that eyesight. Ronnie Miller and myself, as the dogwoods bloom, are entering the woods to start our hunt for the old gobbler that we were hoping for. We were walking and stopping periodically while Ronnie would call. We already had our decoys set up, and one of our cameramen was well camouflaged and waiting for us to enter. We didn't realize it, but a gobbler just over the ridge had already started responding to Ronnie's calls and had noticed a decoy. But we were still a little bit low for him to see us, thank goodness. But all of a sudden, Ronnie heard, as he was calling, what he thought was a gobbler. And it didn't take us long to take up position. Ronnie continued to call, and as I spotted the gobbler's head coming over the ridge, well, you can see what happened.
Got a nice one. Woo! All right. Got a pretty good beard on it.
Congratulations, Alan.
Thanks, Ronnie. You did a great job, man. It didn't happen the way we thought it would. It never does. I was going to be over here. The decoys were out. One of the cameras was going to be over here in this blind. But when we came in, the turkey was ready. We wasn't, but we were real fortunate that we did get the bird. It is a beautiful bird, and I'm looking forward.
It did happen, too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing other hunts with you for sure.
Take care of that gun.
Okay. They make it easy for us in South Carolina with just this sticky backs. A lot of those other states have the wires. Make it convenient.
Yeah, they give you some more weight. 14 and a half pounds. Got it?
Yeah.
This was one of our more successful hunts in Winsboro, South Carolina. A hen that was passing by seemed to give her opinion of all the hunters in the woods. A good friend of mine on another hunt with a bow, John Dust, was trying his situation out. I'd called in this gobbler and all seemed to be going well. As John was peering out from behind his blind, we made a burlap blind around some trees. It blended well, and the turkey seemed to be coming in just close enough. The trees were thicker than was expected, and there seemed to be a lot of briars and things in view that was keeping John from making his shot. So he kept waiting just for the right opening. And as the turkey got closer and closer, you can see John there in his blind. It got into this thicket right when John was fixing to make his shot. He told me at the exact moment that he had that bow drawn, was fixing to release that arrow, he noticed that the gobbler had walked up on a hen. And the hen was too close and was working against the whole shot. This seems to be nature's way of taking care of its game. So we finally thought that the hen would leave, and John kept moving back and forth in the blind, and it seemed like the gobbler spotted him at just one moment. So he was trying to be careful and not to move. But as fate had it, the hen spotted him and spooked the gobbler. And it didn't take him long to decide what to do. John, being the sportsman he is, just decided that that was the way it was supposed to be, and there's always a next time for the wild turkey. At this time, the deer are most relaxed. The buck's testosterone level is at a minimum. He's busy now just growing horns. The does are impregnated and feeding and gaining strength for their time of birth is coming. The turkey, on the other hand, the old gobbler, will take occasional breaks. And this is a great time for the hunters to be in the woods. It seems like the woods now are the most alive. And it's a great time just to get out in the woods and enjoy nature. One morning, while in one of my blinds, I noticed off to the right at about 40 yards what seemed to be a turkey coming. Or was it two turkeys? And then I realized what was going on. I had two gobblers out there in a fight. Like I say, I wasn't more than 40 yards away at the most, and as they worked toward me, I could really hear that the sounds that I always usually would think I would hear, all this purring and aggressive sounds that they make when they're fighting, I didn't hear it at all from these two turkeys. I could hear the birds singing and all the other bees buzzing and other activities. But at no time did I hear either of these turkeys give this purr, which I thought was unusual. What a pushing and shoving match. They can grab one another by those bills and literally throw another gobbler with a flying mare. What strength in the neck of these wild turkeys. Even though I was making some noise inside of my blind, it didn't seem to stop them at all. It just continued on, this pushing and shoving match. It was a sight to see. Later, I noticed the mating going on again. You notice the gobbler's just gotten off the hen. She shakes herself off, and he begins to proudly strut. Hens that are nesting select a site usually in low cover and lay about 9 to 12 eggs that are speckled. Laying these eggs usually take around 2 weeks. Hens usually lay eggs one a day, mostly in the middle of the day. Hens that are laying cover the unincubated clutches with leaves. After incubation has occurred, they no longer cover the eggs.
welcome back to Alan Palmer Outdoors. We're continuing with a series, of course, on the trail of America's wild turkey. This time, though, is going to be a little bit different. We're going to combine the months of May, June, July, and August. There's a lot going on in each month, but they are very similar. We're going to have Lovett Williams, of course, back with us again. So let's join Lovett Williams and let him start off May, June, July, and August. We're glad to have you with us on this program.
I'll tell you something else, since you are a biologist and hopefully can help with this question. It's something I read about again, and you get no real answer as to what to look for on as far as diseases of the wild turkey. And one of them that I hear talked about but not described is the disease of blackhead in the wild turkey. Do you know what we could look for or identify it if we saw something that looked peculiar, or if we should not eat it, or anything like that?
Well, blackhead is a serious disease in domestic turkeys. It was a real problem at one time. And I think that it's not anywhere near as serious a problem with wild turkeys as it has been with domestic turkeys. We know so little about turkey diseases or wildlife diseases in general. We tend to work on captive animals and domestic animals, and then fret over the wild animals, counterparts obtaining those, contracting those same diseases. We don't really have any continually serious problems with blackhead in turkeys in the United States. There's another disease, fowl pox, caused by a virus that is much more prevalent and externally has symptoms similar to blackhead. Fowl pox is like chicken pox is to people, or cow pox to cows, or whatever. And all birds have these different kinds of poxes. They're closely related group of viruses and not well understood at all. But turkeys usually recover from fowl pox and never have the disease again, as you wouldn't, with measles or chicken pox or smallpox or something if you've recovered from it. So some mortality occurs in the wild from fowl pox. There's some forms of it that infect the mucous membranes of the head and all. It even cause their eyes to be sealed shut just at night when they're sleeping. The next morning they can't open their eyes. There are little things like that do occur. Blackhead cannot be diagnosed really accurately unless you autopsy the bird and look at the liver.
Or
And
in other
the
words,
white spots on the liver.
Yeah, there wouldn't be any external
No.
ways that you could identify.
But it's a disease. It's overstated. The problem of blackhead is overstated, in my opinion. And the problem of diseases in general in wild animals are greatly overstated because of our seeing these things in captivity. You can take an animal in captivity, put him in captivity, it's perfectly healthy in the wild, and he'll start showing symptoms of all kinds of diseases because of they infect each other in the close contacts, and coccidiosis being a good example. Every bird in the wild practically has got coccidiosis, got coccidia in its system. You take that same bird, you stick it in a cage, and if you're not careful, you'll see it becoming down ill with coccidiosis. Nothing has changed except you put him in captivity. So I mean, what I'm saying is that it's a concern. It's not much of a concern. What's the concern in the future of the wild turkey is habitat, is the loss of habitat.
May in South Carolina. The gobbler's testosterone level now is starting to decline, meaning that sexual activity is starting to wane. He seems to be more interested now in food sources and water sources, but still keeping a close eye on all the predators that are available. With all the nesting that's going on now, foxes, hawks, bobcats, and such are really active during this period. And it's necessary that they get their share too, because they also have to raise and reproduce and need this food source. Hens that are laying, most of the time is spent away from the nest in the early part of the laying period. As more eggs are laying, then they spend more time at the nest. Most of the time away from the nest, though, is just spent feeding and watering. Incubation period takes around 26 days. And then the miracle occurs. Usually hatching takes place in late May or early June. It's according to when they started nesting. This is a very dangerous time for survival for the wild turkey. With all the predators out looking for food, even the deer are more skittish at this time. After 24 days in the egg, the young turkey poults begin to make noise. The hens also are making clucking sounds back to the young poults. This is known as imprinting. Turkeys carry this information throughout the rest of their lives. It's June now, and the rains still come. It seems just to freshen up the forest. We had a visit one afternoon by an old fox squirrel. He's different from the regular gray, being that he has a black head, a longer tail. These rains can cause a lot of sorrow. We lose a lot of young turkey poults during this period. The rains cause them to have pneumonia or they either drowned. This is a hard time on the wild turkey. They only weigh about 2 ounces after they hatch, and usually between 12 and 24 hours, they're able to follow the mother, and she can train them on just how to start eating. It's amazing just to watch them experiment and try different things. One thing's for sure though, they don't stay too far from mother, and she makes sure everything is all right with them. If danger does appear though, she has trained them to squat low to the ground. Then she'll come back after danger has left, and the whole situation starts over with feeding again. By late June, early July, the deer are starting to suffer with pests like flies. It's really a hard time for the deer during this period. I noticed it seems like they're always flicking their tails or flicking their ears and trying to do their best to get rid of these flies. Occasionally though, you'll see a newcomer at this time, but most of their time is spent staying close to mother. It's a beautiful sight to see a young fawn feeding from the mother in South Carolina. You see how these pests, the flies, aggravate our deer. They just try to embed themselves into the deer's hide and lay eggs for hatching of other flies. One afternoon, I noticed the crows were engaging in an activity that I haven't noticed before. They were working around an old pine tree that had died, and it seemed to be full of insects, evidently. They kept digging around it, picking the tree itself. And once they would find one of the insects, they would pound it before they would digest it. The American black crow, a truly amazing bird. Hens that didn't nest are just feeding and watching for predators. Listen now as this one bearded hen listens at the clucks from another hen, and finally they join together. This has been June. July in South Carolina. The birds in the forest are more than active. They too have been nesting and are doing their uttermost to take their babies and show them how to feed and survive in the forest. It's a beautiful thing to observe. I suggest everyone get out into nature and watch these things happen. It's truly a great time to hike in the forest with family and friends. The deer now are continuing to grow their horns. Still in the velvet stage, but you can now see how they're starting to form out. Our bucks are still more than aware of what's going on in the woods. They're always sniffing out any problems that are coming up. They are traveling with the does now, and when times of danger occur, it seems like they've already started following the does and going in the direction that they want to leave in for safety's sake. Hens that have nested are gathering together with other hens, joining together a nice little flock and taking their new poults for a stroll in the tall grass. This is where they find hundreds of insects that make these bodies develop and become strong so that they're able to fly. It takes at least a couple of weeks before that these new little poults are strong enough to fly up and save themselves from predators that are available in this period. There's always predators, but it seems at this time they're more aggressive now than ever. Foxes are just laying around waiting, just like this red-tailed hawk sitting on this fence post. And this little catbird is more than brave. How she charges this big hawk and finally succeeds in running the bird off. I thought it was amazing. Let's listen to conversations of turkeys in the woods. Lovett Williams, our turkey biologist, could probably tell us what it's saying. But more than likely, they've noticed new life that's in the forest, new competition that has arrived on the scene. Yes, it's time now for the young deer fawn. A mother that is over 1 year old now because she's had two fawn. Usually a first year doe will have only one fawn. After that, they have two fawns. And again, they're experimenting and trying to find just the right foods. Mom's teaching them all about nature. And like all new mothers who try to find just a moment of privacy, it's not long before the little one comes around and is waiting for a special feeding. And sometimes this is not just the best time to have a feeding. It's interesting to watch these young deer. Notice one of these deer, the one that's in the background now, the young fawn, is going to try to sniff what had just happened. And watch the reaction of this deer when he smells the droppings and urine from its mother. Life can really be comical sometimes in the woods. On this rainy afternoon, it's the end of July now, And here's another flock that has joined together. Hens with their young poults. It would really take an expert now at this period to be able to identify if these are hens or young gobblers. Now they call the young gobblers in this stage of life jakes, and the young hens will be known as jennies until they become adults. As you watch this footage, you'll notice some aggression is already taking place. Even now they know who the boss is in their particular groups. Feeding, yes, but always aware if any predators are close. During this time, they are feeding heavily on insects, berries, and of course, all types of grass seeds. After a big feed such as this, they most every day head to an area, even if it's an old gravel road, to eat little tidbits of gravel. This helps to clean their craw that's located around the breast area, to clean out the food that is possibly undigested. As I said before, it's a perfect time for the old fox to be out. Sometimes he scores, and other times it seems that God smiles down on the wild turkey. It's old enough now, after 2 weeks, that it can fly up and sit on a roost. The turkey's survival rate is much greater now. It's August now, and a great time to be in the forest. During this period, the birds are in the molting season. You can see this bird here is putting on new feathers. It looks like a hump on the back of this cardinal. They look odd during this time. But like I said, it's a great time to be in the woods to find any kind of feathers because the molting season is on, and it's more easy to collect specimens. As you'll see the tail feather on this hen, the new feathers are growing in. They're about to the middle of this tail. You see that little black line there in the middle? Those are new feathers coming in. This particular hen seemed to be aware that something was coming or something was unusual. Then all of a sudden, I noticed the turkey bolted off, and I started looking to see what it was that had spooked the turkey. And as you see, a doe was just browsing through the woods, feeding. They're in their own territory. This is just like their living room. And you can bet if something is out of place or new, they will notice it. They'll just stand and watch oftentimes and look for several minutes at a time before they decide everything is okay. And then they'll stroll away and begin feeding again. Here's a scratching from that hen earlier. Some mushrooms that possibly squirrels or the deer have nibbled on. It's toward the end of August now, and you can kind of see how this old gobbler is panning, still being bothered with pests, but just feeding in the fields, gathering the grasses. These little seeds seem to be a favorite thing of the wild turkey. The hens, young poults, now are identified as jakes and jennies. Coloration shows you all. The light brown color of the jennies with the blue-gray heads, and the dark color on the feathers of the jakes with the reddish heads. It's real easy to tell these things, even at some distance now. Look at this young fawn now, starting to lose the spots. Notice this on the back of the neck. They're starting to fade in the last of August. These bees are even anxious to get the last bits of pollen in which to make their honey so that they can survive through the winter months. The leaves are starting to turn, a new season's on the way. New foods are now becoming available as August leaves the forest. Continuing with our series, On the Trail of America's Wild Turkey. We're combining the months, September, October, November, and December. And yes, there will be a hunt in November. We're going to continue to have Lovett Williams a number of times with us, answering different types of questions. So let's go now, On the Trail of America's Wild Turkey. And again, September in South Carolina. At this time, it's interesting to note that the strut and other sexual positions are learned in the very first week. A portion of each day is spent in dusting time. And after 8 weeks, the pecking order is already set. Fighting occurs, the threat posture is being used. Neck stretched, open wings, pecking, and wing beating. Male and female turkeys form their own pecking order. The hen, though, are usually in charge until the poults are the size that the young jakes leave the flock for good. All of these new learned activities oftentimes put the deer on the run. By the second week in September, food sources start to change now. Turkeys are starting to spend less time in the fields and more time in the woods. Some acorns are starting to develop out. It seems the white oaks appear first and then the red. Turkeys nibble off of these low shoots. Deer are still bothered with flies, mosquitoes, and other insects. Some of them have lost their velvet altogether, and others are still carrying velvet. But by now, their horns are developed to the point that you can actually tell what their winter shoots will look like. Here's a deer that actually gets scared and flushed by 2 other deer entering a feeding area. He hears a limb snap, and then it's funny to watch such situations. Now this buck here still has a little bit of velvet on his horns yet. A mature doe feeds not too far behind. Listen to the activity in the background. 2 gobblers are fighting a wild pheasant that seems to have drifted into their feeding zone. After getting rid of him, They just go back and do what's natural, feeding, preening, watching for predators. Now let's take just a minute or so to watch a young buck who has just completely almost lost his spots, just feeding in the woods. Notice the leaves are putting on new color now. Changes in the weather always has effect on wildlife. It's interesting to watch the seasonal turntable in action. As winter arrives, things slow down. As summer comes on, things seem to speed up again. By the last of September, I was able to catch this flock in the field, one of their last times probably together, and glean these seedlings from the grasses. It was late afternoon, and they struck a mighty beautiful sight. I finally located a great big bearded hen. There she is. She was the size of a basketball. A young Jake's beard is not quite visible at this time. September is ending. October is starting. The deer are leaving a lot of sign now, nipping off the ends of tree limbs that are hanging over a spot that they will scratch out and leave their own print of their body in. They'll also urinate in these spots. Does will follow later and pick up the sign of the buck. And she will hang around these different areas as she becomes in estrus or ready for mating. Here's another spot. Once you find one rub and a scrape, you usually find others are about. But they'll oftentimes be different sizes, showing the different sizes of bucks in the area. These young 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds will follow the big bucks and make their scrapes and rubs, practicing for mating later. Here's a real enemy of the wild turkey during the time that they're nesting. I would wish that they could stay out of the forest during the nesting and hatching periods. Maybe one day we'll be able to straighten all these problems out. There's always hope. Food sources, again, are changing. And of course, this again determines where the deer and turkey will be located. Most of the deer now have shed their velvet. Here's one that's not only shedded his velvet, but looks like he's been fighting enough that he's actually lost almost completely one side of his antlers. What a beautiful specimen, but what a shame one half of this rack is missing. You can see some of the velvet hanging on here. The gobblers are hanging together in their bachelor flocks. Some are even still dropping feathers, as you'll see this one sticking out. Notice how slowed down they are as winter arrives. The hunters are in the woods in hopes of a nice buck, but oftentimes they are surprised with wild dogs that are in packs that are becoming more and more often seen. Not only messing up situations for hunters, but they also get on the trail of the deer and put them on the move and kill them. Well, of course, this ends a lot of hunts. It's now about the end of October. We're looking in on a hen, and she's found looks like one of her favorite spots for dusting, getting rid of insects and pests that are embedded down in her feathers. This helps to dry up the oil that's in her feathers, and, like I said, get rid of insects. It aids all situations of health for the wild turkey, and it seems to be something that they really enjoy and get into. It looks like she fills herself with at least a pound or two of this dust. Eventually she'll get up and shake herself off and look like an old black powder cannon has fired. What a sight to catch this in the wild in South Carolina. By November now, leaves are taking another turn of color. A lot of areas, depending on where you live in South Carolina, if you live in the mountains, things seem to change or be ahead a week or two. If you're in the lower part of the states, things seem to follow behind as far as coloration in November. But it's a great time to get out and enjoy nature. Not only just to see color, but just exercise yourself. You've been in a lot of the hot months of summer, and it seems like now is the time to get out and breathe the fresh air. This is a mountain situation I went on. I always carry my old rifle with me. I didn't know if I might want to hunt deer. It's always good to have a little extra meat in the freezer. I always enjoy getting out with a camera or just alone. Just time spent in the wild. And this time to me is really special, and I'm sure it would be for you too. It's like therapy. That's the best way I can explain the outdoors. Get involved with nature's therapy. You can walk in these hills or flatlands. It's good for you to work up a sweat. Get rid of these impurities that's been building up. These things that you'll see out here that you'll never see. You won't even see it on your television, on Discovery Channel or whatever. It's just certain things that need to be enjoyed in this special manner, alone with nature. And if you feel like you want to go for a hunt, go ahead. This is your heritage. So enjoy the out of doors in every way possible. You know, it's always out there. All the seasons of nature's clock. It's December now in South Carolina. Food sources again are changing. It seems that the food is starting to dwindle now, and the turkeys seem to be aware that stress is starting. The stress and struggle for life. The cold weather is on the way. You know, we're in the woods now. The hunters and so forth are in the woods about 5 or 6 months out of the year, and we keep the turkeys under a good bit of stress. Also the deer hear us walking and see us moving about, so we need to do this with some type of caution and realize that wildlife is trying to exist in a natural way. You know, I mentioned earlier in the program that we would have a November hunt, but this particular year the hunting will take place this 1st of December for a fall hunt. Usually it'll happen the first week after November if we have a fall hunt in South Carolina, which is very rare now if we do. But this particular one took place in the month of December. You can see the aggression of the turkeys now, pecking at one another. And as time goes on, this will increase. But they seem to be frantic now about getting the last bits of most of the food sources. It's easy now to tell the difference between a jenny and a jake because the jake's beard now is about 5 inches long. Here's a food source of the wild turkey being gobbled up by this little bird. The turkeys feed on this a lot now. They better be in a hurry. During the weeks of December in South Carolina, the weather could do anything at any time. We might have a small snow or sleet such as this. It puts stress on the situation with all the wildlife, of course. As I mentioned earlier, things just slow down. This gobbler is working the fields, trying to find anything it can. It seems it found an apple in an old apple orchard. Trying to do anything now with what's left of what used to be fine grasses and seedlings. It even seems to notice the weather now itself. Notice even in rest periods, you might see the old gobbler or hens still pecking at these dead grasses, something that might help them to survive. Times are getting harsher and harsher. But with the deer though, mating season is still in swing. The old buck is still looking around and trying to get as close as he can to any doe who might allow him to get close enough to mate. His keen sense of smell helps him to determine all of this. The young bucks, as I mentioned earlier, following the big bucks, waiting for their opportunity to mate if the old big buck is not around. A lot of fighting goes on during this time. But the young bucks just pick a spot, chew their cud, and wait. They know they'll have a time later. Let's see now. As I recall, it was a pretty nice day that Ronnie Miller and myself once again joined together. You know, Ronnie is a great caller, and I always try to depend on him when I really want to do serious turkey hunting. He definitely taught me everything I know about calling and mostly about turkey hunting in general. This was an afternoon hunt. When we entered the woods, everything was really quiet. We split up. Ronnie took up his spot. We had scouted this place a number of times and seen a lot of good sign and thought that we could get a pretty good gobbler here. We've seen some good sized droppings from a gobbler. Ronnie had picked this particular spot to sit down because he thought his calling would carry better from this advantage point. You know, when you're turkey hunting, you got to really camouflage up real good. After I'd settled in, my heart was really pounding as I loaded up the old gun and made sure that the decoys was in the right position. I was anxiously awaiting Ronnie to start calling. You know, in December you hear a lot of kiki runs and such, and he was able to involve some of that in his calling. A good 20 minutes had gone by, possibly 30. I kept glancing at my watch when I thought I heard something in the distance, and so did Ronnie. He was experimenting with different calls at that time, hoping for a response. That's what we've been waiting on, by golly. We started really looking and searching for exactly where it came from. I finally spotted him. What a beautiful specimen. What a beautiful head even. Ronnie was still working on him. He was about 30 yards away at that time. A few minutes later, he arrived right at the decoys. I was so nervous at this point. I had so many little trees in my way and everything. I wasn't sure what exactly was going to happen. But he finally lined up what I thought would be a good shot. So I just said a small prayer and went with it. And this is what happened. Oh. He's a big, woo, what a turkey. Son of a gun. This is living in the South. Woo! What a turkey. Look at those feathers, the tail. Man, he's beautiful, all these iridescent colors. When the colors came red in his head and he was strutting, I've never seen anything like it. What a rush. I mean, you just don't do this kind of thing every day, that's for sure. Ronnie, come in here, man. See this thing. He came right on here. I couldn't believe it when he went into a strut.
I could see him strutting from where I was at.
I started to shoot him before. I thought he was going to run off or hear something or see something. Somebody way in the background was grading some property back in there, and that thing was running, and I didn't know what could happen. I was ready to shoot him, but boom, he went into that strut, and as soon as he went into the strut, he kind of drummed a little bit. And man, my adrenaline was running wide open. I couldn't believe it. We were very fortunate to be here in South Carolina, out in the woods like this, enjoying nature and sharing in the heritage of hunting the wild turkey. Man, I appreciate you calling. Man, did a beautiful job for me. Mm-hmm. Man, what a bird. Son, that's a load. A real pleasurable load. Yeah, boy, that's a nice. Usually around the last part of December, you'll find old hogs rooting around in these fields and through the woods looking for anything available. All animals and game are suffering during this period. Old deer's got his winter coat on now. He's beautiful though, even though he's under a lot of stress. The breeding season is ending. The turkeys are doing all they can to survive in the wild in South Carolina. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Lovett Williams. As far as the habitat is concerned, how do you feel about logging practices, if they are a great hindrance to the wild turkey or not so serious as we might think they are?
Well, first you've got to realize, and I will have to give the devil his due on this, and that is the fact that that tract that would be logged is woodland, makes it turkey habitat. A lot of the terrain in this country hasn't got any turkeys because it hasn't got any trees. And we don't think of the things that are done on those tracts as being detrimental to turkeys because there's no turkeys there, you know.
Yeah, okay.
So think about it that way. In other words, the land use that we call forest management is better for turkeys than the land use we call, say, raising rice or grass or hay or, you know, tomatoes or oranges or any, other, you know, any number of other things. Now, within that framework of a forest and how to manage the forest and how to harvest trees, there are good ways to log and there are bad ways to log. And logging generally degrades turkey habitat. Generally speaking, it degrades it somewhat. And some kinds of logging, you know, worse than others. I hate to see sloppy logging, and there's a lot of sloppy logging going on, and it's not necessary. And timber management is not a universal thing. I mean, some people just are not managing
Would a certain kind of logging cause the terrain to be easier to travel for the turkey than other types of logging, as far as weeds growing up? Or
yes, there definitely selective logging that's, in which care is taken not to just knock down every other tree in the woods and all the shrubs and all that sort of thing, is much less detrimental than the kind of logging where they just knock everything down. You know, they take out some good trees and pretty much mess everything else up. And almost any kind of logging that's done on real good soils where water conditions, moisture conditions, and the nutrient soil fertility is high, you're going to wind up with sunlight reaching the ground more than it did before, and you're going to wind up with a lot of thick growth of briars and all that sort of thing. And that degrades turkey habitat very seriously because turkeys do not instinctively, they avoid real thick, heavy cover. That's where predation occurs. Predators are harbored there, and predation is easier to...
in other words, it could cause them to completely leave an area.
They leave it. Oh yeah, they will completely leave an area that's been heavily logged and allowed to grow up in all kind of thick things.
In closing, I know you're busy and need to get back to your project, and I've probably held you too long, but do you have any closing statements of anything that you'd like to mention in particular as to how the wild turkey is doing now in the United States?
Turkey's doing quite well. I think it is a good story. The turkey has been restocked in all of its former range as far as each state is concerned, and in quite a few states on to the west where it never occurred before. It was kind of blocked from expanding in across the Rocky Mountains and across some of the desert country in the west. Now it occurs in every state except Alaska, and I believe there's a turkey hunting season of some kind, maybe very limited, but in almost all the states, and maybe an exception, but I'm not really up to date on that. It is estimated that there are around 4 million turkeys right now in the United States. Turkey hunting has become much more popular. Some people have kind of regretted to see that. I don't really think that turned out to be as bad as they say, because anything that's not valued is going to be neglected, and anything neglected this day and time in this world is going to be seriously degraded. So by having turkey hunters and turkey hunting being popular, you're going to have more support for wildlife conservation. And what's good for the turkey is good for a lot of other things too. Not good for everything, but generally speaking, anything we can do for any wildlife species is going to be helpful to a lot of other things. So that support that's created by a lot of turkey hunters and a lot of turkey hunting is really helpful. We can control human behavior pretty much, and through regulated hunting laws and all. So I think the future is probably pretty good overall for wild turkeys for quite some time to come.
Lovett, I would like to thank you, and I think the wild turkey would, if they could, for educating the public to the habits and needs of the wild turkey. It's beautiful what you're doing, the work that you've done, what you will be doing. We thank you again. Hello, friends. This is Alan Palmer saying this is the last in our series on the trail of America's wild turkey in South Carolina. And I'd like to thank you for joining us. I hope you've learned something about the life cycle of the wild turkey in South Carolina. Until next time, may God bless and goodbye.
Wow.